The nonprofit MBA purpose is to provide new business insights and fresh creative ideas for executive directors and their teams that will help them improve their organization. Here is your host, Stephen Halasnik.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Stephen Halasnik, and I am co-founder and managing partner of Financing Solutions. Financing Solutions is the leading provider of lines of credit to nonprofits. On a personal level, I have a 25-year career of building companies, and I have the privilege to speak with nonprofit executive directors on a daily basis through Financing Solutions. If you like today's podcast, please feel free to share it with a friend. I'm excited today to introduce our speaker and someone we're going to learn a lot about. It's Dr. Bill Anderson. Bill is currently the principal and executive director of the Center for Individualized Training and Education, also known as the CITE School, CITE. They're located in Providence, Rhode Island. CITE's mission is to assist a student in learning self-management life skills in multiple settings in order to return to a lesser restrictive environment in less than 30 months. The CITE team, led by Bill, has reorganized a 45-year-old school with program drift. And I think the key word we're going to be talking about today is program drift. In 2015, Bill took over a 100-year-old facility with 9 students that was in decline. The program is now focused on positive behavioral support, applied behavioral analysis, collaboration with parents, and meeting with the need of the demographic with now over 35 students. A trained lawyer, Bill spent 25 years of active reserve duty in the Navy Coast Guard. Of course, we thank Bill for his service. And is a retired special educator, principal, administrator, superintendent of special education programs. He's a behavioral psychologist and a parent of a child with profound disabilities. Bill is recognized for accepting challenging positions in both public and private school programs and has over 40 years of experience with students diagnosed with multiple handicaps. Bill, welcome to the Nonprofit MBA podcast.
Thank you, Stephen. I appreciate the opportunity to converse with you today.
You know, I was reading over your biography, and, you know, it's funny because I was looking at mine, and, you know, you don't look at them that much. And when you do have a chance to read it, you're like, wow, I've done a lot. Does it feel that way? It's
often an interesting conversation with people when they say, "So, what do you do?" Yeah, it's been very enjoyable for the most part, and I get the most enjoyment really out of working with students and having had the opportunity to sort of recreate a school based on the fact that this is what we know students need, and not necessarily the teachers or the administrators or the business model. And sometimes that gets me into trouble.
Well, it's always complicated, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. That's very true.
So today what we're going to be talking about, something you have experience in, of course, is what to do when your nonprofit's mission and operations go adrift from its original vision. You know, it's an area that you have direct experience in, and you know, certainly when you're north of 50, you learn that experience.
Well north.
Yeah, you learn that experience matters. And you know, I don't know about you, Bill, but every single time I want to really kind of learn something and really I got to get an answer that's more in depth, the first thing I do is pick up a phone and call someone who I know who has experience in it. Do you do the same thing?
I do, and that's been one of the biggest challenges here. I've had a lot of experience running school programs, working with challenging folks, but the business side of this has become far more of a challenge in a positive way in most situations. But it's beyond just the school. It's the school as a business that often keeps me on my toes much more than running program now. I have staff that have come in to do various aspects of what I would do as a principal, but now I spend more time actually running the school business, which has been interesting, but sometimes pretty daunting.
So tell me a little bit how did you get involved with the CITE School?
So the CITE School had been in business for quite a number of years, had been through various iterations based on the different program directors and executive directors that they had. And the program about, I'd say a good 20 or so years ago, really sort of lost sight of what the original program model was. It was developed up on the campus of Butler Hospital, which is a very large mental health facility here in Rhode Island. They started a school program, very connected in a number of ways to the city of Providence, ended up with a building on the opposite side of the city of Providence, and started working with kids with significant behavioral issues, a lot of multi-handicapped kids. But the design was always to work with kids with dual diagnosis, not just a mental health disability or disorder, but also an educational disorder as well. So the school departments were involved. And they drifted pretty significantly over the past 20 years. I got pulled into this because I was, in essence, available again from another program that I had worked in for a few years to try to put back on the right path. And that's kind of a history that I've had, and pretty much everything I've done in education has always been kind of coming into a situation that was not so good.
Yep.
So I had a member of the board who called me and said, we've got an opening for an ED. Would you be interested? And I said, sure. I'd been a special ed director and assistant superintendent in the state of Rhode Island for, 20 some years, and never heard of the CITE School. So I found it sort of intriguing because it was learning something new and different in a kind of a pretty small place. Rhode Island is pretty tiny in comparison to pretty much anywhere else. So it was unusual for me not to know about a special ed school program, but I didn't. So I was intrigued.
No. So when you originally came in, I guess the board already knew they had a problem.
Yeah, so it was more programmatic, mainly because the school departments will refer students to us or for the CITE program to work with kids who are not in a place to stay in a public school setting.
Yep.
They either require physical management or de-escalation and all this sort of scenario that a lot of public school programs are just sort of not designed to be able to do. And that's where a lot of my background comes in. So I was always intrigued by working in public schools and trying to keep kids in schools versus outplacing students. But there are times when that needs to happen. So I was intrigued by the fact that the census numbers were going down, particularly from the school district here in Providence, and started to ask some questions why. And so I found out a whole lot more about why the program was in decline. And it was really because of program drift. There was no real clear direction of the program. There had been students here that had come in when they were 5 or 6 years old, and they were still here 18, 19 years later. And we haven't done that kind of work since the early 70s, where students would be placed someplace and they'd never leave. I'm not a fan of that. I think it's really the wrong thing to do for kids. But I understand that there are some kids that are not ready to be in a public school setting with 1,000 kids in the school.
Now, when the original purpose of the school, had it changed? I mean, or were they not following it anymore, or did it need to change with the times?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, it didn't really change to meet the needs of students. It was a program that had been a program for quite a long time, taking some profoundly handicapped kids, but not really making a significant difference in what it was that was going on, and particularly for those students. So the drift occurred, I think, mainly because of financial issues. They didn't want to increase the tuition because they felt that school districts would move away from them because other programs might have been cheaper. But in essence, based on my conversations with their various school districts, that wasn't the issue at all. It was really program drift. There was no real focus in the program on working with individuals that had pretty significant mental health issues, but there was no one really here clinically to be able to manage that.
Right.
So we had to make a change for not only financial reasons, but mainly for the fact that that's not why people will send students to a special education outside placement. Yeah. They want a specific plan. They want to know something is going to change, and they want to know when it's going to change. So understanding that, that's the direction we work in.
Yeah. And we're going to, for our listeners, we're going to, at the end, get into the 3 to 5, action items that you would recommend when someone's seeing that either their program isn't going well or that it's gone off its course or whatever. But I want to lay the groundwork right now on a couple of things. So what was the hardest part of the job when they brought you in?
Not having full access to all the financial issues that were involved in the agency. So I walked in and was told that we had no money. There was no money available to make any program changes, no money available to make changes to the building structure. There was just no money in the program. They were, in essence, losing money. And as I gained more and more understanding and more access, I started to ask some pretty significant questions of one or two of the people that actually had some knowledge of what was going on. So, but the board, I was somewhat surprised at, because I felt members of the board, particularly the folks that I interviewed with, had a better understanding of what was going on. And that really wasn't the case. What was going on is that the program was continuing to survive, but only continuing to survive.
Yeah.
And that's what needed to change.
Yeah.
So that's what kind of sent me off in the direction of, I really need to learn more about this whole business model because we should not be losing money.
Yeah.
There's got to be money here someplace. And there was.
So how long, they bring you into the position, how long did it take you before you kind of understood exactly what was going on?
About 2.5 months.
Oh, that's
okay. Yeah, because I'm sort of an inquisitive guy. I ask a lot of questions. When I was a teacher, I always taught Socratically, so asking questions is kind of what I do. And the fun part was people were pretty defensive about the answers. That's what gave me the inkling that there's a whole lot more here than I don't know.
Yeah.
And then I just kept digging. And it was a good thing I did.
Now, the board, did you feel the board and the people at the organization gave you that time, or were they starting to get a little antsy?
No, the board, so the first time I met with the board, I believe there were probably 10 people in the room. And within 2 weeks of my saying, yes, I'd be willing to take the position, 6 out of the 10 were gone. Wow. They all resigned. But understandably so. Most of these folks have been on the board for 30 years, some even longer than that. They met once a year. Wow. It was more for me. Oh, right.
That's unbelievable. I mean, usually it's once a month, right?
Oh, you would certainly hope so. Yeah. But yeah, that's kind of what it was all about. There had been a chairman of the board that had been running the agency since the day it started. And he had passed away 2 or 3 years before. The vice chair of the board took over, but he was sort of on the periphery of what was going on. What was occurring is that the business manager and the chair of the board were very much connected. Yeah. So conversations occurred around the executive director and not with the executive director, because the executive director was the principal and the only person that has the license to actually run the school. And so that's where things had gotten off the rails, because the person that should be running the school was not running the school. It was really between the business manager and the chair of the board.
Were you pretty good at politics at the time?
Being in public schools?
Well, I mean, when you're trying to...
Politics is a biggie.
Yeah.
I'm not from the area. I'm not from Rhode Island. Although I have contacts here and have been to school in different places in Rhode Island, but I'm not originally from here. Mm-hmm. So it makes a whole lot of difference in a real tiny place like the state of Rhode Island, in a smaller place like the city of Providence, and not even being from the state nor the city. I had worked in Rhode Island for 30 some years or 20 some years rather, but the end result still is you're not from here.
Yeah. So what I kind of meant was when you're dealing with the board and, I guess there was some, there's people leaving. I mean, was it tough, or did you have to work the politics a little bit internally to kind of manage that situation?
Well, what happened was, if you think of it, we went from 11 people on the board to 3 or 4. Mm-hmm. It was a whole lot easier to manage the scenario because you only have 3 or 4 people. Yeah. And those 3 or 4 people were invested in the school, but didn't know a lot about the school. Yeah. And what a school in the 2017, 18 should be. They were still working back on the 1980s model, which had never changed, honestly. Yeah. So that was part of the problem. The politics involved is really dealing with the local area. Mm. Politics is real local around here. You're trying to get people's understanding of what it is that we do and why we do it. We still deal with the fact that the biggest car wash in Rhode Island is right across the street from us, that 95% of the people in Rhode Island probably know about. Everybody's been looking at this building for years as they wash their car and had no idea it was a school. That's odd. That's really odd. So, that was the sort of the politics of it.
So you think that if those 7 or so board members hadn't resigned on their own, and let's say they were all still there, do you think you would have been able to accomplish what you wanted to accomplish?
Yes. Okay. Because the question would be, so why do we need to do this? Why does this need to be different? Well, it's not really different. It's going back to the same original population you were serving with a psychiatrist who's on board, but you need to do it 30 some years later and recognize that the model has changed. Yeah. How we work with kids is much different than what it was back in the 70s. And I know that because I was working with kids back in the 70s. Yeah. So I got that part of why, some people felt a little uncomfortable with the whole idea of changing. But what's really changed is that the director, the principal, who's the licensed person, runs the school and not the business model. Yeah. Because we found out that, there were $300 and some $1,000 sitting in a couple of bank accounts that nobody really knew existed. Wow. Yeah. 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 And that's why as soon as we decided to go full tilt, we had the money available to capitalize the kind of changes that we need to make, because we had 3 classrooms and we had so many kids referred to us because we proved that our program model was what was going to work with kids. We just ended up with supporting more and more kids and taking on some of the more difficult kids that the other programs around us, our competitors, were not willing to do. We proved to school districts that we actually do some pretty awesome work with kids and get them back to the school districts. Yep. And Providence has really bought into this model and is making a difference. So that's, why we're still here.
So it sounds like because you did the groundwork of understanding the problem, yeah, I mean, did you think you spent more than how long was it before you actually implemented some changes?
Um, Probably 35 minutes after I walked into the building as the principal.
Yeah.
There were just things that were laying around from a business, from doing human resource work, in my years younger, and saying, so why are these folders just sitting out like this? Oh, it's easier to get to them.
Yeah.
No. These are personnel records. They're supposed to be under lock and key all the time. Oh, that's not how we do stuff here. Oh, no, that's how we're going to do stuff here. Yeah. Things need to change. We don't do this kind of stuff. So yeah, that's how it all started.
Did you have to let anybody go?
Yes.
Yeah.
A number of people, within a few months, there were a number of people who were looking to move on. And that's fine. And sometimes that has to happen. I mean, I've done this enough times to know that there are people that are going to say, well, I'm not going to do that. And okay, well, we really don't have a place for you here because things need to change. One of the first people that decided to sort of challenge the system was somebody that actually cooked the food for our kids. And we don't do Hot Pockets. We don't put things in the microwave and warm things up for kids. I want kids to have a good meal that we know is healthy and has lots of good nutrients that need to be there. That helps us recognize that kids are getting, a minimum of 2 awesome meals a day. We don't, buy food from the federal government. We go out and purchase stuff just like a restaurant.
Yep.
And that's what our chef does. We have a chef that cooks specifically for this population of kids.
So we have about 5 minutes left. So are there any other recommendations that you would recommend to a executive director?
So once you have a mission, vision, value statement, and you realize that there are things that are occurring within the agency that have drifted way away from what that mission, vision, and values are, then you are not really keeping a good eye on why you're really there. Our job is to keep looking and seeing what it is that we can do, not only to make it better, but to make what it is that we do now better for the school districts or the students or the parents, so that we can show people that the way we are helping their children to learn tasks that they may not be able to do at home, we document all that information. Again, we have it on our digital tapes to record the kind of things that might be going on. Yep. And sometimes we can share that with parents and sometimes we can't. It kind of depends on who else is in the picture. But if we had a special ed director that came in and says, can you prove those things to me? Yeah, we have documentation that can prove that to you. That's a big deal.
Yeah. So it sounds like first step, understand the problem, really understand the situation that's going on, take a step back. Secondly, and probably the most important, is redefine your purpose, your mission's purpose, and really kind of visualize as to what you really want to become. Third step is with your staff, to get everybody to kind of brainstorm and come up with solutions or what they want to see based on that work that they've done with the mission and the purpose. And that way you kind of get buy-in with your staff too.
Correct.
And then the last step is kind of you implement it, and then you kind of make sure that, you're on track, and, maybe you try to be careful about, not going too far, just kind of, working the easier stuff or, making progress, and then you can kind of broaden it as you go along. Does that kind of sound accurate?
Yep. Yeah. Yes, that's very true. I have found that has worked in several situations that I was hired into where there are underlying conflicts between faculty and staff and parents and kids and school board members and all the different scenarios where you have to really synthesize all that information and then come up with a plan to manage the direction you want to try to take things.
Yep.
And assess whether that's actually possible. I'm one of those people that sees the glass is always half full.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be true to the work that I've done over my years in this particular field. And honestly, in anything that I've ever done, to be able to say, this is just not going to work because I can't be the only one that's trying to push this train over the edge. Yep. It can't just be me. Yep. I have to be able to articulate why it can be more than me and why it's important. And I've always been successful, I would say, in 95% of the scenarios, being able to bring some people along who would stand up and say, yeah, I agree with you. That really should be different. But that's happened because I had some awesome mentors that were out there for me, particularly in the field of education. Tom DiPaolo, who ended up retiring as the director of special education programs in the state of Rhode Island, was an amazing individual as a leader. A guy by the name of Joe Cunha, who was also a very intriguing and interesting and unique leader that I learned a lot of different aspects of life from. It's important for people in leadership to have had someone that you sort of look up to say, there's something there that makes me want to try to do something that they did, become a superintendent or something.
Yep, I understand.
I got to a point where I said, the next step for me is going to be superintendent. And I just said, I don't want to lead that life. I don't want to be the one that has to be politically correct all the time, which is not my strong point.
Yep.
And I need to follow a different path. So I went back to actually teaching in schools. I went back to a high school to work in a behavioral program because I just needed to get back to what I knew was the right thing for kids.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Bill, I would like to really thank you for being on the Nonprofit MBA. I think it's obvious that, what you're talking about relates not only, of course, to the nonprofit, but to the business sector. And, for those who are listening, if you like today's podcast, please feel free to share it with a friend. And of course, if you're looking for a line of credit for your nonprofit, Financing Solutions would love to work with you. If you want to reach us, Financing Solutions, you can call us at 862-207-4118, or you can visit our website at fscreditline.com. Again, that's fscreditline.com. Bill, if someone wants to get in touch with you, how would be the best way to do that?
My email address here at school is dr.bill.anderson at CITEschool.org. We have a website, www.citeschool.org, where you can see a lot of our activities and programmatic model in action. If I could, the last comment I would make is the one experience that I didn't have is I always did budgeting, but I was never the one that had to bring the money in to be able to kind of do the whole budgeting thing. And we got caught this year with a scenario where one of our school districts was not paying within a 3 to 4 week period. And it's a very significant amount of money to be able to meet payroll. And I was lucky enough to find and fortunate to find Steve and Financing Solutions out there, which helped us bridge the gap between when we send out our invoices and when we need to make payroll every week. And if one doesn't catch up with the other, we can be in real trouble.
Yep.
And that's where financing solutions, particularly for nonprofits, we went to our local bank, which was Citizens Bank, and they really weren't interested. And we tried a couple other banks in the same kind of scenario. And I just from a Google search, I found financing solutions, and they were right there, very helpful. Some of the conversations that Steve and I have had about the business side of things, which there are times that I just don't have that experience, has been really helpful. And I can't thank Steve enough for providing the funds at the time we really needed it, and happy to pay him back, because it's the best possible thing that you can have available.
Well, thank you, Bill. I mean, I love working with nonprofits. I really believe in what we do. And there's a big need out there. It's obvious that, that the nonprofits are having an issue getting lines of credit. So again, thank you for being our client. And of course, thank you for speaking today as well. Lastly, if any of you out there feel that your nonprofit has a unique story relating to how your nonprofit is applying business or leadership tools, please contact me. We are always looking for speakers for our podcasts. On that note, I'd like to thank you for listening, and thank you for making the world a better place.